Sunlight, thick with dust, fell across two perfectly made beds in a room frozen in time. The only sound was the faint hum of a dormant computer, its screen dark beside a half-finished calculus textbook. A single tube of lip gloss, bubblegum pop, lay abandoned on a desk next to a charger for a Nokia phone, its coiled cord waiting for a call that would never come. A poster for the Strokes watched over the silent space, the band's defiant cool now a relic of a different era. This was the sanctuary of Skyler, Chen, and Jasper Jazz Rossi, a capsule of their intertwined lives filled with organic chemistry notes and dreams that stretched far beyond those cinder-block walls. The air itself felt heavy, not with clutter, but with the deafening absence of their laughter, their whispered late-night secrets, their future. Every ordinary object was a monument to a life interrupted, a haunting contrast between the vibrant promise of that semester and the immense, silent void they left behind. It was a photograph of a moment just before the world shifted, a perfect, painful snapshot of all that was about to be lost. Their story began here, in the quiet, before it was shattered by a single, unread text message. The last known trace of Skyler Chen was a handful of pixels glowing on a tiny LCD screen, a message so ordinary it was chilling. Her thumb, perhaps chipped with silver polish, had pressed the keys of her Nokia 3310, each click a tiny final act of normalcy that would echo for years. "Don't wait up, study session running late, crashing at Jazz's cousin's place. Love you." It was a text built on a foundation of trust, sent to her parents with the casual ease of 100 others before it. For Eleanor Chen, that message was a comfort, a brief sigh of relief that her daughter was safe and had a plan. For Luca Rossi, Jazz's older brother, it was a simple data point, a note in a mental file that his responsible brother was being just that. The message was a paradox, a shield of utter normality that concealed a terrifying falsehood. There was no cousin's place. The family would soon learn Jazz's cousin lived 2 states away. The study session had ended hours earlier. Every reassuring word was a lie, but not one told by Skyler. Someone, or something, had constructed this narrative of safety, using her phone to build a wall of trust that would immediately blind the investigation and misdirect the family's frantic first steps. That single text became the ghost that haunted them, a digital epitaph that promised a tomorrow which would never arrive, its cheerful punctuation a permanent monument to the moment their world fractured. The police would initially cling to its promise, while Eleanor and Luca would soon learn that the most terrifying lies are the ones that sound exactly like the truth. A betrayal that began with a vibration in a mother's pocket, leading them down a dark path where every official door was already closing. The first 48 hours were a vortex of frantic energy, a storm of phone calls and door knocking that yielded nothing but a deepening dread. The police, initially attentive, quickly settled on the most convenient theory. 2 college kids buckling under academic pressure had chosen to run away together. They painted a picture of voluntary disappearance, a narrative that felt like a betrayal to those who knew them best. Eleanor Chen's protests were met with a sterile, bureaucratic glaze. How could Skyler, who FaceTimed her cat Mochi every single night, have ever left him crying and unfed? Luca Rossi raged at the implication, listing all they had abandoned: Jazz's wallet, his passport, a semester's tuition just paid in full. Their certainty crashed against the immovable wall of police procedure. The investigation stumbled from one dead end to another, each more frustrating than the last. A bus station clerk's unreliable claim of seeing them offered a false flare of hope that quickly fizzled under scrutiny. The forensic team found their dorm room achingly normal, devoid of any struggle, their personal effects offering no clues, only a deeper sense of their abrupt absence. With no evidence of foul play and an understaffed department prioritizing active dangers over a voluntary missing persons case, the file was demoted, the official energy dissipating like smoke. The chasm between the desperate families and the institution meant to protect them widened into a void, the silence from the authorities becoming a louder answer than any they could have spoken. The truth hadn't just vanished, it had been buried under a mountain of paperwork and flawed assumptions, left to gather dust for 12 long years, waiting for a different kind of detective to finally listen. 12 years of silence were broken not by a detective's hunch, but by the low, resonant ping of a multi-beam sonar unit gliding across the river's surface. In 2015, the case of Skyler, Chen, and Jasper Rossi was a forgotten file in a dusty cabinet, but for the team from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the river was a fresh blueprint. Their mission was purely practical: map the channel's bathymetry for a new bridge support, a task of concrete and calculus. Their world was one of humming server racks and the cool glow of flat-panel monitors, a sterile environment where data was king and emotion was an irrelevant variable. The technology was a form of magical realism, using sound waves to paint a photorealistic image of the unseen world below, revealing every contour of the riverbed with astonishing clarity. It was a precise digital exorcism of the water's secrets. For days, the screens displayed a predictable topology of silt, rock, and sunken logs, the natural detritus of any ancient waterway. Maya, a hydrographic analyst more accustomed to identifying geological features than personal tragedies, sipped her midday coffee as she monitored the endless, scrolling data feed. Her eye, trained to spot anomalies that could threaten navigation, caught it almost subconsciously, a sharp, angular shadow that broke the riverbed's organic flow. She zoomed in, the pixels resolving into a stark, unmistakable form. It was a perfect rectangular outline, exactly the size and shape of a mid-size automobile, nestled against the massive concrete footing of the very bridge from which Skyler and Jazz had vanished. The world of high-tech certainty collided with a 12-year-old ghost story in that single, silent moment. The coffee forgotten, Maya leaned forward, the chill of the air conditioning suddenly biting deep. This wasn't a rock formation or a forgotten piece of construction equipment. It was an artifact of lives interrupted, a secret the river had kept in its dark embrace for over a decade, waiting for the right beam of sound to give it a voice. She reached for the internal comms, the routine of her job evaporating as she prepared to report not a hazard, but a tomb, setting in motion a chain of events that would bridge the gap between cold data and a cold case. The bureaucratic machinery, once set in motion, grinded forward with an agonizing lack of urgency, its indifference a stark contrast to the seismic revelation on Maya's screen. The official report from NOAA was logged, forwarded, and initially dismissed by a county clerk as historical junk, a relic from a time when the river was a convenient dumping ground for stolen cars and unwanted appliances. It was a Tuesday afternoon problem, something to be filed away and addressed when manpower permitted. But for Maya, the perfect geometry of that sonar image was a splinter in her mind. During a quiet moment, she ignored protocol and navigated to a public-facing database of the state's cold cases, a digital graveyard of forego and mysteries. She filtered by date, by location, her breath catching as the list narrowed. And then she found them. 2 smiling faces from 2003, a missing persons report for Skyler, Chen, and Jasper. Rossi. Her cursor hovered over the vehicle description. A 2001 Honda Civic Coupe, forest green. The dimensions in the report matched her anomaly to the meter. The sterile data point on her screen dissolved, replaced by a profound and chilling certainty. She wasn't looking at junk. She was looking at a coffin. This time, her call to the authorities carried a new, undeniable weight, forcing a reluctant sheriff's department to dispatch a dive team. The scene at the riverbank was a tense fusion of scientific certainty and grim speculation. Below the surface, the world dissolved into a cold, brown gloom, visibility measured in inches. The diver's light was a feeble torch in the oppressive darkness, illuminating swirling silt and curious fish. His movements were slow, deliberate, fighting against the current's persistent pull. The first thing he registered was the unnatural flatness of the object, then the curve of a wheel well encased in muck. His hand, clad in thick neoprene, brushed against the surface, feeling the rough, gritty texture of advanced corrosion. He followed a pillar, his light glinting off a fragment of glass still trapped in the rubber seal of a window that was rolled partially down. He finned backwards for a wider view, the powerful beam sweeping across the wreck. Slowly, agonizingly, the form resolved from the murk, the iconic sloping rear end, the distinct shape of the headlight housing, and finally a fragment of the manufacturer's emblem still clinging to the trunk. It was a Honda Civic. The river had held its secret for 12 years, but now it was giving it up, piece by terrible piece, in the beam of a flashlight, the truth finally emerging from the deep to shatter a decade of silence. The car just sat there, a silent answer to a question everyone had long since stopped asking, its presence rewriting the final chapter of a story everyone thought I knew. The operation to retrieve the vehicle was a grim, mechanical ballet conducted under a leaden sky. A large crane was positioned on a barge, its thick cable disappearing into the murky water where divers worked with quiet efficiency, attaching heavy straps around the rusted frame of the coupe. Every movement on the river was slow, deliberate, and respectful. This was not a salvage job, but an excavation of a grave. The metallic groans of the winch and the low thrum of the generator provided a somber soundtrack to a recovery that felt both invasive and sacred. On the bank, a handful of detectives stood in silence, their faces grim, watching as the cable tightened and the water began to churn. Meanwhile, in the sterile beige confines of a police station conference room, Eleanor Chen and Luca Rossi sat surrounded by the very same officials who had dismissed their fears 12 years prior. The air was thick with a toxic mix of cheap coffee and unbearable tension. They had received the call every family of a missing person dreads and prays for. "We've found something." The vagueness of the statement was its own special torture, forcing them to relive a trauma they had spent a decade trying to compartmentalize. Eleanor's hands were clasped so tightly, her knuckles were white, her gaze fixed on a meaningless water stain on the table, while Luca paced the small room, his body thrumming with a nervous energy that had nowhere to go. Each minute stretched into an eternity, a brutal pendulum swing between the desperate hope for closure and the paralyzing dread of final horrific confirmation. On the river, the crane's engine roared as it took the full weight of its load. The water erupted as the front end of the vehicle broke the surface, a torrent of brown water and silt pouring from every opening. It was a monstrous apparition, shrouded in river weed and rust, its original color barely discernible. The silence on the barge was broken by the crackle of a police radio. A detective waded to the edge of the barge, squinting through the drizzle at the mangled rear of the car. He keyed his mic, his voice calm and flat, cutting through the static. "Command, we have visual on the license plate. It's a match. Confirmed. It's Romeo, Oscar, Sierra, India." The alphanumeric code for Jazz's plate hung in the air for a second before the radio acknowledged. Back in the conference room, a detective's shoulder unit erupted with the same transmission. The words were technical, devoid of emotion, but they landed on Eleanor and Luca with the force of a physical blow. Luca stopped pacing, his body going rigid as the blood drained from his face. Eleanor let out a sound that was neither a scream nor a sob, but a raw, guttural expulsion of air, a 12-year dam of hope finally and utterly shattered. There was no victory in this moment, only the devastating weight of a truth they could no longer outrun. The waiting was over, replaced by the hollow certainty of a new and more painful beginning, the car's recovery not an end, but a door swinging open into a darker, more complex chapter of loss. The vehicle, now cradled above the water, dripped its history onto the barge deck, each drop a promise of secrets yet to be uncovered. The vehicle, now elevated on hydraulic lifts in a sterile forensic bay, was a grotesque sculpture of decay and forgotten life. The acrid smell of river muck, drying algae, and aged gasoline filled the air, a scent of deep time and tragedy. Every surface was caked in a fine, gritty silt that had preserved and obscured in equal measure. The forensic team worked with a reverent, meticulous slowness, their movements precise under the harsh fluorescent lights, knowing this time capsule from 2003 held the only answers that mattered. The initial external examination confirmed the sonar data. The car had entered the water nose first, striking the riverbed with enough force to crumple the front axle and windshield, but leaving the passenger cabin largely intact. The driver's side window was rolled down a quarter of the way, a critical detail that explained the rapid flooding and the absence of air pockets that might have trapped the occupants. It was either manually opened or had failed under pressure. Inside, the scene was hauntingly mundane. Textbooks on organic chemistry and European history were swollen into unrecognizable pulp on the back seat. A faded parking pass for Willow Creek College was still adhered to the windshield. In the footwell of the passenger side, partially buried in sediment, a forensic technician's careful brush revealed the distinct shape of a Nokia cell phone, its faceplate a cheerful silver, Skyler's. This discovery sent a new current of focus through the room. If data could be recovered, it could map their final moments. There were no obvious signs of a violent struggle, no torn upholstery, no blood spatter on the headliner, no defensive wounds suggested by the positions of the recovered remains. It pointed away from a carjacking or an attack. The personal effects were poignant and ordinary. A mix CD labeled Jazz's Driving Jams was still in the stereo. A single earring was found nestled in the cup holder. A gym bag in the trunk held mildewed clothes and clean sneakers. It felt like a snapshot of a completely normal evening interrupted mid-motion. But the most telling discovery came from the mechanical inspection. The car's VIN number flagged a notorious and deadly history. It was part of a massive recall for a defective ignition switch, a flaw the manufacturer had hidden for years. This particular switch was prone to suddenly turning off the engine if jostled by a heavy keychain or a bump in the road, killing power steering, power brakes, and airbags in a terrifying instant. An engineer carefully extracted the faulty part, holding the small, lethal piece of plastic that had caused dozens of accidents and cover-ups. The narrative now fractured into two equally plausible possibilities: a tragic mechanical failure on a dark road near a bridge, or a sinister act disguised as one. The car held its secrets close, offering evidence for both conclusions, its silent testimony a riddle that would only be solved by the digital ghost in the phone recovered from the silt. The next clue wouldn't be found in the rust or the wreckage, but in the binary code of a final, unsent message. The Nokia phone, a tiny silver relic, was a monument to technological resilience. Its internal memory, a frozen digital snapshot of the final hours of a life. Forensic specialists placed it in a Faraday bag to prevent any remote signal from altering its data, treating it with the reverence of a sacred text. The process was a digital archaeology dig, a painstaking byte-by-byte extraction from a waterlogged logic board that had slept on a riverbed for 12 years. They worked in a sterile clean room, a world away from the muddy recovery site, using specialized software to bypass corroded connections and rebuild corrupted files from the device's flash memory. The data that emerged painted a portrait far more complex and fraught than the official police report of two carefree students who had simply vanished. The call log and text message cache revealed a day of heightened stress. There was a series of increasingly tense calls between Skyler and a number listed in her contacts as Professor Albright, the last one lasting only 22 seconds, suggesting a sharp, aborted conversation. More intriguingly, the recovery software uncovered a string of text messages from an unknown number that had been deleted from the active inbox, yet remained etched into the phone's memory. The messages were brief and ambiguous. "We need to talk, tonight," and "Don't bring Jazz." They were sent hours before the final, misleading text to her parents, and they pointed to a secret meeting, a hidden layer of the evening completely unknown to the original investigation. But the most crucial evidence was the GPS tracking data, painstakingly reconstructed from the phone's temporary cache. It mapped their final journey not as a direct route to a family member's house, but as a meandering, puzzling path. After leaving the campus library, the car had not turned toward the interstate. Instead, it had taken a series of back roads, winding its way up to the old river overlook, a secluded parking area known more for late-night parties than for study sessions. The data timestamp placed them there for nearly 19 minutes, a significant, unexplained pause high above the river with the lights of the bridge twinkling in the distance below. Then the tracking resumed, showing the car leaving the overlook and heading back toward the main road, but it never reached it. The signal terminated abruptly halfway down the access road that led to the bridge, the final coordinates hovering directly over the dark water. This digital breadcrumb trail fundamentally altered the narrative. The 19 minutes at the overlook suggested a planned stop, a meeting, or a private conversation that had gone terribly wrong. It introduced motive, opportunity, and a potential third party into what had moments before seemed like a clear-cut case of a tragic mechanical accident. The phone's silent testimony had resurrected a suspect, turning a scenic viewpoint into the potential prelude to a crime and forcing investigators to see the familiar bridge not as the site of an accident, but as the endpoint of a deliberate act. The quiet of the overlook now held the echo of a conversation that would become the investigation's new, desperate focus. The gravel parking lot of the river overlook was a lonely, wind-scoured place, offering a panoramic view of the very bridge that had become a tomb. For the renewed investigation, this desolate patch of asphalt became the new epicenter of the mystery, the 19-minute gap in the GPS data, a void demanding explanation. Two competing theories now hung in the balance, each equally plausible, each leading to a radically different truth. The first was a story of tragic, random chance. Had Jazz, perhaps stressed after Skyler's argument with her professor, driven up here to clear his head? In that scenario, the fatal flaw in the ignition switch could have chosen that moment to betray him. A sudden stall on the precarious, winding descent, a panicked struggle with a dead steering wheel, and a horrific, accidental plunge into the darkness below. It was a clean, mechanical explanation that absolved everyone of malice. The second theory was darker, woven from the threads of those deleted texts. This was a planned meeting. Had someone followed them here? Had an argument erupted? A confrontation that ended with the car being forced or deliberately driven over the edge? This possibility painted the overlook not as a place of solace, but as a hunting ground. Luca Rossi visited the spot at the same time of night they had, standing where his brother's car would have been parked, feeling the same chill wind his brother would have felt. The ache of absence was a physical weight, and the vast, beautiful view felt like a cruel joke. He tried to imagine the conversation, the laughter, or the tension that must have filled that car, the final moments of normalcy before the world ended. His grief was compounded by the agonizing ambiguity. Not knowing whether to mourn an accident or rage at a murderer was its own unique torture. As detectives re-interviewed a wider circle of former classmates, a new, seemingly insignificant piece of campus gossip surfaced from the haze of memory. In the weeks before they vanished, Jazz had been involved in a heated dispute with another student, a sophomore named Mark, over a stolen organic chemistry textbook. It was the kind of petty, dormitory-level drama that defined college life, a conflict resolved by a resentful apology and the return of the book. It had been forgotten by everyone. Until now. Under the harsh lens of hindsight, however, the trivial argument warped into something more sinister. Was it really just about a book? Or was it a pretext for a deeper, more dangerous grudge? The overlooked drama of stolen homework and bruised egos now cast a long, ominous shadow, proving that a life-and-death consequence could grow from the smallest, most ordinary seed of conflict. The team now had a name, a person of interest whose mundane motive had to be re-examined under the stark light of a potential homicide, pulling the focus from a mechanical failure to a very human and familiar face. The final, heartbreaking truth was not a single moment of malice, but a cascade of ordinary events converging into catastrophe. The investigators pieced together the timeline with the grim certainty of pathologists performing an autopsy on the past. Skyler, agitated from her argument with Professor Albright, and Jazz, likely trying to comfort her, had driven to the overlook for privacy and a moment of calm. For 19 minutes, they sat in the car, the engine off, talking under the stars, their world still containing a future. The fatal sequence began when Jazz started the car to leave. As he maneuvered the vehicle on the narrow, uneven track of the overlook's exit road, his knee likely bumped the keys dangling from the ignition. That slight jostle was all it took. The defective switch, a tiny piece of plastic worth pennies, abruptly cut power. The engine died. The dashboard went black. In a horrifying instant, power steering locked and power brakes failed, transforming the lightweight coupe into a heavy, unguided projectile. Jazz, a competent but young driver, would have been overcome by panic, wrestling with a rigid steering wheel as the car, still in gear, continued its momentum toward the steep incline that led down to the bridge road. The partially open window, a detail that once suggested escape or struggle, now pointed to a desperate final act, an arm thrust out into the night, perhaps to wave for a help that would never come, as the car veered off the edge and plunged into the void. It was a perfect storm of flawed engineering, bad luck, and a terrible location, a mundane mechanical failure that yielded consequences of biblical proportions. The revelation was a different kind of gut punch, offering the closure of an answer but denying the catharsis of a villain. Their deaths were a tragic accident, a secret the river kept until science could exonerate them from the rumors of flight or folly, leaving their families to grapple with a grief made more profound by its cruel, random simplicity. The corporate memo ordering the recall had arrived at the dealership 3 months too late, a final, unforgivable betrayal that sealed their fate, shifting the focus of justice from a person to a corporation. The truth brought a painful peace, the kind that settles like a cold, clear dawn after a night of terrible storms. There was no arrest to be made, no courtroom confrontation to be won. The antagonist was a faceless corporation and a flaw in a piece of plastic. Yet, in the absence of criminal justice, Eleanor and Luca forged a different kind of accountability. They channeled their bottomless grief into a fierce, unwavering advocacy, transforming themselves from grieving relatives into vocal champions for automotive safety. The manufacturer's massive delayed recall became their battleground. They testified before legislative committees, their voices steady as they held up pictures of Skyler and Jazz, forcing politicians to see the human cost behind the dry statistics of ignition switch failures. They gave interviews, wrote op-eds, and tirelessly worked to ensure no other family would have to endure their 12-year purgatory of not knowing, followed by the agony of discovering a death that should have been prevented. Their closure was not found in vengeance, but in purpose, a legacy carved from unimaginable loss. The resolution was profoundly bittersweet. The mystery was solved, the whispers about runaways permanently silenced, but their children were still gone. They had traded the torment of the unknown for the permanent ache of a preventable tragedy, a hollow victory that nonetheless allowed them to finally stop searching the world for answers and begin the slow, lifelong work of carrying their loss. They had honored Skyler and Jazz not by catching a monster, but by protecting others, ensuring the ripple of their lives extended far beyond the quiet depths of the river, turning a story of ending into one of vigilance. The truth brought a painful peace, the kind that settles like a cold, clear dawn after a night of terrible storms. There was no arrest to be made, no courtroom confrontation to be won. The antagonist was a faceless corporation and a catastrophic flaw in a piece of plastic. Yet, in the absence of criminal justice, Eleanor and Luca forged a different kind of accountability. They channeled their bottomless grief into a fierce, unwavering advocacy, transforming themselves from grieving relatives into vocal champions for automotive safety. The manufacturer's massive, delayed recall became their battleground. They testified before legislative committees, their voices steady as they held up pictures of Skyler and Jazz, forcing politicians to see the human cost behind the dry statistics of ignition switch failures. They gave interviews, wrote op-eds, and tirelessly worked to ensure no other family would have to endure their 12-year purgatory of not knowing, followed by the agony of discovering a death that should have been prevented. Their closure was not found in vengeance, but in purpose, a legacy carved from unimaginable loss. The resolution was profoundly bittersweet. The mystery was solved, the whispers about runaways permanently silenced, but their children were still gone. They had traded the torment of the unknown for the permanent ache of a preventable tragedy, a hollow victory that nonetheless allowed them to finally stop searching the world for answers, and begin the slow, lifelong work of carrying their loss. They had honored Skyler and Jazz not by catching a monster, but by protecting others, ensuring the ripple of their lives extended far beyond the quiet depths of the river, turning a story of ending into one of enduring vigilance. Their fight ensured that the final chapter was not about the water that took them, but about the lives their story would go on to save. Today, cars still cross the bridge, their passengers oblivious to the secrets the dark water below once kept. Sunlight glints off the surface, hiding the depth with a mask of ordinary beauty. The truth, like the lost car, had always been there, waiting for the right combination of technology and tenacity to bring it into the light. It was a reminder that some mysteries are not about malice, but about silence, the quiet spaces where tragedy settles and becomes history. The story ends not with a verdict, but with a photograph. Skyler and Jazz, forever frozen in a moment of shared laughter, their youth a stark contrast to the years of sorrow their absence created. Their legacy is no longer a question mark, but a testament to love's persistence, a quiet proof that even the deepest silence can be broken.